So in this film we're looking at a boudoir simple setup for you. So if you're getting started in boudoir or any kind of bedroom style of set of photography, it could even be maternity or newborn and the likes of. We're looking at a simple setup that you could convert or even set up in a client's home with enough space and things ready of a simple kind of highlight to put up and some net in. So we're looking at specifically the lighting, but we'll also include some advice on props as well as the kind of accessories to kind of add that little bit more into the photography. So in studio here we've set up a big highlight on the left hand side. Now this is the 8x7, it's the biggest of the last light highlights. It's basically a softbox, originally designed as a background, but it can be equally used as a great big kind of light source, like a big window. And in front of it we've put some net in to disguise it as a softbox, as it were, or background, and we're using it as more like it looks like a window in a kind of a large house and so on with it. Then the only other accessory that we're using in this instance is the likes of a reflector panel board. Now, even though I'm using a poly board bought from the likes of a DIY store, painted one side white, one side black, you could use just a simple reflector on a stand, whatever it would be. Even the bigger the reflector, the better will be, especially when we're using light from behind us, such really. So as far as the exposure is concerned, metering from the nose towards the light source would expose for the highlight running down the subject's side of the face closest to the light source, of course. Really what we want to do here is burn this out a little bit more to have this high key kind of look. So we want to then actually just meter for the actual nose and an upward direction, so that will give you around about a stop difference. So if you metered from the nose back towards the light source, and let's say it was giving you the likes of 5.6, if you opened aperture up at f4 and you were shooting from the position, let's say where I am now with camera, or from the reflector board, you would get this lovely perfect exposure actually onto the skin because she's turned away from the light. However, if I shot from above looking down onto the subject, I would need to expose for the actual window light itself, so in other words from the nose towards the light source to get a perfect working exposure. So I would need to actually reset it to the likes of 5.6 on camera to give us this kind of make-believe reading as I'm trying to explain things really. So when we're turning the body away from the light source and we're photographing towards the light source, we need to expose for the skin tone nearest to camera. Whereas when we're photographing with the light source being the main key light, so either with our back at the light source from the other side of the bed, let's say here, with our back against the light, and she's turning to look towards us, we would have the exposure from the nose towards the light source, otherwise we're going to have burnout. If we're photographing from above, no matter what, we're going to be seeing more of the light that is hitting the flesh side nearest to the light, so we need to, no matter what, expose for the actual light source itself. So whether that was a window or in this case a last light highlight. So when we've kind of got our simple setup in place, and you can see here there's a slight tweak gone on. So in other words, from the last image where it was just really a bed and a reflector, we can dress it up in a little bit more of a bedroom set. So in this case we've just popped some kind of rattan furniture, I think it's called, just to the right hand side, little kind of lamps, and we've just moved the light away from the bed, or I should say we've moved the bed away from the light just that little bit. So now the transition between highlight and the kind of the shadow is going to be a little less kind of extreme, because obviously we've kind of allowed the light to wrap around her more. But we still need to apply that same exposure in exactly the same way. So if she's looking towards the light source, expose for that. If she's looking away from the light source, then you can open up your exposure by around about a stop. You might be tempted to add a secondary light into the equation, like we're seeing here on the top right hand side, instead of a reflector panel. And the biggest problem that you'll have here is that it's going to pretty much outdo what the reflector panel was doing. What do I mean? In other words, it's going to either add in too much overall light or too good a contrast of the light. If we photographing commercially, obviously we wouldn't just use a reflector panel, we would use the likes of fill-in flash and so on to give a lovely crisp edge and a controllable light. But if you start to over flash or over illuminate the shadow side of the body, you get this kind of double lighting scenario, and you never really end up with this essence of natural light that I would encourage you to start off with. So from here, again, the simple set is the highlight behind the netting. In this case, we've raised it up on a background support now to get it much higher to increase the room set size and things really. But if I was going into a client's home, if I just took along the highlight, positioned it in the window of the bedroom, let's say, to act as a consistent light source, one kind of strobe studio flash in the actual highlight at the end, as it were, and it points in and bounces off the back of the box, then this will give us a beautiful kind of big window light wherever we're going. So we've seen a really simple setup here. If we're looking to add more drama into the set, then we can make sure that we continue with the light coming from behind. When the light comes from behind, we increase the contrast like I've just explained. So in other words, here what I've done is rotate the bed around through a 90 degrees in an anti-clockwise position to the last photograph, as you can see. Yeah. So now the bed head is facing towards the actual light source. Okay, I've removed the kind of the lamp off here as well. But now what I've done is taken the light out of the highlight. So whereas the zips kind of keep it in position and control, I've unzipped, I've turned the light around, and now it's positioned to bounce off the white wall. This will give us a kind of a similar effect that we just saw with the window light. And it's given us a new direction to the light source, an angled direction, but it's still bouncing off the white wall, coming back towards us. And the exact same thing could kind of create. So in other words, if she was laying on the bed and she was looking towards the wall that is now lit, that is where the exposure would be taken from. As she would be looking towards me, we'd have a reflector panel just out of shot to my left-hand side, nearest to the pillows, and I would open up my aperture by around about a stop. You can see here there's also a barn door studio flash in position. This is ready to actually create a more Hollywood style of light, perhaps, where we can put some more definition actually going on to the face. So we're kind of changing the whole the story and the styling of the image by creating a more defined kind of harder light source of image as well. So when we start to look at it in situ, the image on the left-hand side is basically lovely and soft because we're using the light coming in from the softbox, as it were. It's then coming across her. It's burning out some of the detail on the skin, which is natural in this setup. It's bouncing off the light, the reflector panel, to bounce some light back into the face to give us this lovely quality of light. So even though I'm saying just open up the aperture, in the same way we need to have some reflected light coming onto the subject, because if we don't, that light is going to be muddy and she's going to be grainy and kind of flat in contrast. So we always need some reflected light to add that little bit of edge of contrast back within the image. If we'd reverted to the photograph and we were using the studio flash like we just saw, and it's in position ready on the right hand side here, we would get a very, very similar photograph as long as this flash is switched off. If you're using one light source, but you've also got a setup in a small space to be using two lights, one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of photographers make is that they forget to switch the flash off. They might have switched the modeling bulb off, but they've got to switch the flash off, otherwise that's going to affect the actual exposure each time it kind of goes off. So if you're using the likes of triggers where you can control what lights to fire, or I should say what lights not to fire, then that's a great kind of stepping stone for you to work much quicker in a studio space, to save having to revisit. So with the subject on the bed, and with the light coming in from the left hand side, if the subject is too far forward of the light, yes, you're going to end up having this more split light effect. So you can see, if you squint, you'll see the image, and you've got a highlight running on the left hand side of the face, and you've got a darker element on the right hand side. Now that can be fixed by just simply turning the head of the subject towards the light source more. You don't really need to do anything else, but we've created more of a contrast level because we've brought the subject and dragged the bed, now just a blow-up mattress, forward towards camera position. In other words, we've moved the light source, which would have been technically at our 9 o'clock position. It is now more like a 10 o'clock position with some light still spilling actually onto the face. So to soften this, you might bring a reflector panel in, like you can just see, just at a shot on the right hand side there. You might be drawn to bring that in straight away, but if you're looking for a boudoir style of image, or a style of image that you want a little bit more contrast in, use less reflected light to fill in the shadow. Then you just need to animate the subject's pose and the subject's gaze to basically help you kind of fill in the dark areas within the photograph. And as I said here, just if she turned her head, her nose, which is pointing directly at camera for now, if she turned in an anti-clockwise position, so from a 6 o'clock gaze as she is now into more like a 7 or an 8 o'clock gaze, the light would actually start to fill in the face in a natural way. We don't really need to worry about filling in this leg over here on the right hand side. So remember that if you're working close to the subject and she's going to be directly looking at you, you definitely need reflected light with a reflector or a reflector panel to pop and help the contrast level. If you want more dramatic and she's not going to be looking at you all the time, then you can use a slightly harder quality of the light by moving it slightly behind the subject and getting them to then gaze towards the light source more. Now you can see the effect of when we've brought the reflector panel in, and because she's turned away from the light source fully with the face, really all the lighting onto her is going to be from this reflected panel, and once more an opening up of the aperture. Yes, so in the last photograph we saw the correct exposure from the nose to the light source. We're going to call it 5.6, but now she's turned her body away from the light source. We've added a help to the quality of the light from using a reflector, but we've also had to open up the exposure by around a stop. So in that way, we're now beginning to burn out a little bit on the back here, but we've brought full control of light actually onto the face itself. So I think it's often easier when I'm trying to explain this in a workshop method is you can see it when you're photographing from above. So in this style of photography, which I love to shoot with just the mattress on the floor or even just a duvet on the floor, using a white sheet to actually disguise the body, allowing the cushions to actually fly off. But now you can see with the reflector panel being turned, and this is a kind of an 8-foot sheet, so it's being turned from a vertical position to a horizontal position. So just like the light source, the reflector is now very big. Now I'm not suggesting that you do this from your word go unless you've got a permanent setup room as a studio. You need something that is going to fold away and collapse as far as a reflector is concerned. But here we can start to actually see within the girl's face. If you squint again, we've got a very bright side on the right hand side, and then we've got a shadow side on the left hand side of the face with it and things really. So the lower she is to the light source, in other words lower to the ground, with the light source getting higher, it's going to allow itself to wrap around towards the subject more. But in this case, remember the exposure is from the nose towards the light source, so back down to say our work in f5 5.6. When the subject is beginning to move more in towards the light, so in other words here, the light is coming in from the kind of 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock position to our left-hand side. You can see that from the actual lighting on the face itself. It's got good contrast. It's got good control of depth of shadow as well. It looks and feels more directional light source, of course. That's what we've got here. So whether it's a softbox, an umbrella, in this light bouncing off a wall, or in this case the highlight, it's creating this more drama on towards the image. So when my back is at the light source, we can expect this kind of light. When my subject's back is facing away from the light, we can expect more of a semi-silhouette kind of look and feel. So as long as we accept that when she is looking towards the light source, and if the camera is in the light source, near the window light in other words, we're going to get this more kind of classic use of the light. And when we're kind of working with the customers back away from the light source towards camera position, we're going to get this kind of more silhouette kind of element. When we start to add reflector in or flash in to the fill though, you can see the difference here where this looks natural, a big wrap of light from a window. We expect to see this kind of light with our eyes. When we fill in too much, it starts to actually create this wraparound lighting or dual lighting as such, and I think this looks a little bit fake, so I would opt for the other style of photograph. In the simple set again, when she's looking and near the light source, we've got the light source coming in. I'm just on a bit of a footstool here, or if the bed is very low or she's just on the mattress on the floor, I can get away without basically having to use the footstool then. But because she's leaning back again in towards the light source, we've got this lovely classic lighting onto her, and look how soft this is. And that's soft because it's so big and so close to the subject. We get this lovely wraparound light, and because we're showing it in black and white here, and you can see all the whites of the sheet as well as actually the whites of the highlight on the face, you can see the control of exposure. When we start to use more of a spotlight effect as the only light source, this is from the barn doors I mentioned at the beginning, you can see the increase in contrast because you can see an increase in the shadow behind the head compared to the last image where the shadow behind the head is very, very soft. So this is a big light source. This is a unsoftened, smaller light source, and even though it's a distance away from her, it's creating more contrast within the scene. If you want to have this effect, you like the Hollywood kind of solid the contrast light, but you want to bring a little bit more of a higher key, then of course we can switch the highlight back on again, and that will obviously enhance the darker areas. But one of the problems we've got here by using both lights at the same time, as we were expecting the effect to be, it's this dual light. It's overfilling or kind of overlighting the subject. So by design, we usually always want one light and one light coming from a direction, which is preferably not flat onto the subject. So when we start to add an opposing light on the opposite side, they start to conflict, and we're not used to this as the human eye, of course, because we live on a planet with one sun and we're used to reflected light being soft. And so that is the way we walk through the world, and that's why it's got to look real. So that's the kind of the setup and how you can really minimize but also maximize ready for the actual shoot. I would always recommend you using a big softbox, soft light source. I'd also on hand, I'd have the likes of a beauty dish with a grid on, or the likes of a barn doors to give me a little bit more of a dramatic effect and things really. The other things that I usually try and encourage photographers to put into their basic boudoir kit would be the likes of a sheet. This can either be silk or a cotton sheet. It's great to actually use to hide, and again you can get to the implied status. A sheet is good because then even just with the pants in position, the client can kind of just tuck their sheet into the pants. We can get a beautiful bare back shot then. And then, of course, when we start to switch on the Hollywood lighting setup with it, we can use it in exactly the same way. So you can see some of the setup shots here and things. So by design, I would always go for a more drama of the shadow than a fill-in and the wrap. So 3 key accessories: a sheet. Encourage the client to actually bring in a kind of a cupped bra or these stick-on bras, because they can really help you. And the other thing would be the likes of a little tutu skirt that we have in a variety of sizes to just actually allow the client to actually hide the knicker-line if we're not getting to implied nude and so on. So the sheet and the kind of the dramatic light together can really give us some strong images, either bouncing off the wall, one light, or actually adding in the dual lighting element. So again, remember, the key thing is when you're using light from behind the subject, you're going to need a reflector of some kind to help the contrast. Plus, you're also going to need to open up your aperture just that little bit more. Hope you've enjoyed this film. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.